Georgia Tech, a ranked team. Oklahoma, also ranked, that didn't participate, and Texas there as well. Those are some of the teams that didn't participate in our top 25. And again, we only missed 3 games. And yeah, I'm a little disappointed because the 3 games we missed come from the Atlantic Coast Conference. It is what it is. Trash conference. We'll get into it, obviously, when we get to that section, when we go through all 52 games. And we miss one from the American, which I'm not too mad about because, you know, Tulane beating Memphis kind of just makes things more interesting there. But we will dive in first with the bottom half of the top 25, which starts us all the way in Tampa, Florida, between USF and UTSA for a weeknight matchup between the Bulls and the Road Runners. 55-23 is the end result. Yeah, USF doing USF things, blowing out their opponents in conference besides Memphis and besides Miami. I think everything else this year has been one-sided for the Bulls. And they were just up early, had their way with the Roadrunners. Business as usual here in 2025 when it has USF involved. But a big win for them as they continue to kind of put themselves in position to possibly get into one of those outside positions for the college football playoffs. So it was a very important win there. Miami is the next game to talk about between them and Syracuse. They're at Hard Rock Stadium. I was very surprised to see a scoreline not so high from the Hurricanes, and it is what it is. 38-10 should have been more, especially with Syracuse without a quarterback that has taken just a huge element out of the Orange offense. Stephen Jelly echoing this since his injury, since he has not been in the lineup for Fran Brown and Syracuse. Syracuse has just been awful, and we see them be pretty awful this past weekend. But Hurricanes, you should have put at least 50 points on Syracuse with a non-existent offensive threat there. So I'm a little worried, especially with some of the other games that we're going to talk about in the ACC. As we continue now through to USC versus Northwestern. This was a Friday night game. Very disrespectful, to be quite honest with you, to have USC play on a Friday night when first round playoffs for all of the high schools are occurring on the same night. It's just me, because I'm from the area. I thought it just was not a good look, but it is what it is. The Trojans are going to do Trojan things, and they win though, 38-17 there against the Wildcats, as they should be beating Northwestern by multiple possessions. So it's at least a good thing going for SC fans there. But this upcoming weekend, they have a very tough test again at home against Iowa. As we moving along through the top 25, we now are talking about Cal upsetting Louisville there in Kentucky, 29-26. I did not expect this game and the result that we see here. This one went to overtime. I was like, oh man, Louisville, you better be winning in overtime. When I first saw this game, at least from the live scoring, I was dipping in and out. I think at the time I was watching Texas A&M handle Missouri there in Columbia. And then when I was like, okay, let me go look at the score lines for everything else. And I was like, oh wow, Cal's taking Louisville to overtime. And then they win. It's like, whoa. The ACC is as bad as I was thinking in the offseason, going into the season, last year as well. It's just it's kind of like the cannibalization that we saw from the Pac-12 from the past 10 years, essentially, is what we are getting from the current Atlantic Coast Conference. And we'll see some more of that cannibalization when we talk about another game that happened in Charlottesville. But good for the Cal Berkeley Bears. They went on the road, going to the East Coast, handling business. The last time they went over to the East Coast, it was against Virginia Tech, where they did lose in overtime, I think ultimately against the Hokies. But this time they get the job done. against Louisville. Next up, we have a game in the American. Tulane gets the job done there in Memphis, Tennessee against the Tigers, 38-32. Just a crazy cycle that we are seeing here in that conference. You know, Tulane beating Memphis, Memphis beating USF, USF destroying everyone else in the conference. It's kind of unfortunate that we don't get to see the Bulls play the Green Wave in the regular season. But at the moment, it looks like we will see USF play against Tulane in the American. I'm not too sure how it all cracks down in terms of who plays who or who will host, technically, is what I'm getting more at for that conference title. But I think on paper right now, Tulane will be the host between them and the Bulls. I don't really see Navy beating either Memphis, USF, or even Army. So they might go 0-3 for their next 3 games. So once we go into that section, when we go through all 52 games, we'll talk about it a little bit more, as what I just said will make a little bit more sense when we break down the standings for the American. But good for Tulane for a nice bounce back into the conversation of playing for a conference title, which I think they deserve. You know, they handled business against Northwestern. I think it was like 6 or 3 points where they gave up against the Wildcats earlier this season, and they also beat Duke. The only game they just were outclassed in was the one last week against UTSA, where they just dug themselves into a hole that they could not get out of. And then earlier this season, where they got unfortunately blown out by Ole Miss. I think it was in SEC territory. Yeah, that game was in Oxford, if I'm not mistaken. We continue through games that we're reviewing in our top 25. Brings us to Wake Forest upsetting Virginia. Now, it's not the first upset that the Demon Deacons have had this season. A couple of weekends ago, they beat SMU with a walk-off field goal that barely went through the uprights. Here, they barely beat the Cavaliers 16-9. And yeah, it's just the cannibalization of the Atlantic Coast Conference we see here. Virginia lost to NC State, and if I'm not mistaken, Wake Forest fans or Wolfpack fans will correct me. I think Wake Forest did beat North Carolina State earlier this season. I have to double check that. I didn't have a chance before the show. Regardless, it's just not a good look, because Wake Forest beating anybody, it's like, ooh, it's Wake Forest in the first place. I know there's a new regime there in the staff positions, but Virginia, this is a game where you should be winning. I would have to go back and look at this to see if there's any key injuries outside of Morris, their quarterback Harris, their key wide receiver. They have a decent running game on top of that. So yeah, this one's a pretty interesting scoreline to just kind of see the result of how the hell did Virginia lose this game at home against Wake Forest as well. But again, the ACC cannibalizing itself. I'm kind of just more interested on how this all ends, because now they allow SMU, Georgia Tech to get back into the conversation. I think that is actually going to be the conference championship game at the end of the season. Louisville with this another loss in the conference, because they just lost to the Cavaliers, as my voice cracked there earlier this season, and now they lose to Cal. It's like, how does that all crack down? Because they beat Miami, and so Miami's even farther down the standings than people would actually kind of have a look at. It's just a whole mess, a whole hot mess we have there in the Atlantic Coast Conference. But we'll talk about it a little bit more when we get into the standings, and also kind of dive into the rest of the games that each of those teams kind of have as well. At least ones that are going to be in contention for a conference title there in Charlotte, North Carolina. We keep moving to Vanderbilt hosting Auburn and beating the Tigers in overtime 45-38. Vandy keeping themselves alive. First team to score more than 24 points against Auburn this season. So you know Vandy is pretty good. And I gotta give a lot of credit to Auburn this campaign here in 2025. I know they've lost a lot of games, but their defense has been very resilient, very much holding up as much as they can. And for them to give up 45 points for their first game without their head coach Hugh Freeze kind of makes a lot of sense. And I thought that firing was a little premature, to be quite honest. I know Auburn fans are very impatient for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe because of the national championships that they've won and lost within the last 15 years, kind of thinking like they're in contention or in the same realm as Alabama, but they're not. You gotta have to like let coaches cook a little bit longer. You know, I love Cam Coleman. I actually really like Jackson Arnold as a quarterback. I just didn't think it worked out at Oklahoma, but here we see them put up a really good fight against Vanderbilt, who keeps themselves alive in, again, that conversation to get in to the college football playoff as the number 4 team in the SEC, maybe number 5, possibly 6 teams coming out of the Southeastern Conference. Half of the field is what I'm saying, yes, that the SEC could get into this upcoming college football playoff. You know, there's a lot of factors that would have that happen, but very much in the kind of just like if you crunch the numbers, like there's a very small possibility that it happens, but it like 5 teams is like what I was like not thinking in the offseason. Like there's no way they're gonna get 5 teams in, but when you actually look at it, it's like they can actually get 5 teams very easily. When it comes to 6, it's like, okay, that's the harder number to look at. 4 is like, okay, they're for sure going to get 4 teams into the playoff this season. So Vanderbilt, again, with this win, just keeps them in contention. They don't have to play. But this is like the crazy part. It's like they don't have to play for an SEC title. But, you know, if they win out, they beat Tennessee. That's kind of like their big game here at the end of the season for the Commodores to kind of achieve. If they can get over that hump, like they're in the college football playoff, and I'm here for it. I think I like seeing more teams that we don't usually talk about, especially in the last 20 years, in being able to compete for a national championship. I'm all for it. I'd rather see more parity in like the more mid ranges. I'm okay with seeing the top dogs in the top positions for the conference titles, but in that mid range, I'm totally okay with like your Vanderbilts, your Indianas, your I don't know who to throw out for the ACC, but I guess Louisville would be a decent shout. Your BYU's, your Utahs, who probably won't win the Big 12 this season. It just adds just more things into the, I guess, conversation that I like talking about here on the channel. The final game to talk about on the graphic, as I ranted a little bit too long about Vanderbilt versus Auburn, is Notre Dame hosting Navy there in South Bend, Indiana. 49-10 is the result. I was talking to, or at least I put in a nice comment that Trey Smith, who was like a big guy that talks about American Conference games, at least last year. He hasn't been putting too much content out in general, but I love his opinion on anything American, which is kind of weird. Like when I say American, people that might tune in think I'm talking about the country, but no, I'm talking about the conference. But yeah, Navy winning this was very much impossible. There was some really bad news that Horvath, the quarterback for the midshipmen, was not going to be available to play against the Irish. So it's like, man, there's just so many things that were just not going in Navy's way, and that's why you have the end result of 45-10. Notre Dame have somehow, some way got themselves back into a position to where they will make the college football playoff. They lose another game, they definitely will be out. But with the games remaining, they definitely also have a decent chance to not ruin their chance in competing for another national title like they did last season. As that is the bottom half. Let's get to the top half. Ooh, look at all that green. Nothing but green. This is kind of what we like to do and why you got to pay attention to our top 25, really our top 15 in general. I think maybe next season there's a possibility where I don't do a top 25, I just do a top 15. I was thinking about doing that for 2025, but for now, this is what it looks like in terms of how we did in week 11. We hit all the big games, all of the top 25 matchups. I think this is the first time where we got everything right in terms of teams in the top 25 this season, which is I'm totally cool with. I think at the beginning of the year, it just kind of was a whole kind of mess and unknowns. Like the transfer portal just adds so many things that when you're talking about this sport, you just don't know if you're going to get it right or not. And those elements I think we have now honed down on as we drop into Ole Miss blowing out Citadel 49-0. This game didn't have a line to begin the week, as number 8 here at your Sports Outpost gets a nice cupcake win. It's very interesting how the SEC schedules these games. I would feel like they shouldn't, regardless of how good their conference is. I feel like if the SEC, like it's going forward, I'm forgetting the conference commissioner's name, talking about how like we want to play more quality opponents outside of conference, and I think they should do that. You know, just having these FCS schools on your schedule, I know it's a nice money bag for those schools, but going away from that, I think would be better. You know, you could still schedule like a Conference USA, Sunbelt, MAC, those kind of teams here in this slot. Give them that money instead of the Citadel. That's just me. But anyways, they win 45-0. They actually don't cover there. They were favored by 54.5 points. And yeah, Ole Miss fans and Ole Miss people that were betting on this game, unfortunately, actually get it wrong, even though we got it right in terms of like who was going to win. But we all know Ole Miss was going to win that game. Next up, we move into the biggest game of the weekend there in Lubbock, Texas. 29-7. Texas Tech handles business against BYU. A game where Texas Tech really had to take their time. And I think you have to give them a lot of respect because they had like 5 field goals, if I'm not mistaken, in this game. So basically, they had so many good drives, so we're like, okay, let's just settle for 3 points. Let's not take the risk on fourth down, which we have been seeing a lot of. I don't think a lot of people have brought this up at all in this college football season, is that so many teams have been going for it on fourth down, not only in their opponent's territory, but also in their own. And I kind of want to see at the end of the season the amount of fourth downs that all of these major schools have gambled on and see like the fail pass rate as well. Regardless, back to the game in Lubbock, 29-7. Texas Tech basically shut down BYU's running game. You saw hints of it there in the first half, but it was basically non-existent there in the second half, to where the Provo Cougs had to pass it. And it's unfortunate that BYU suffers their first loss this deep into the season, because I think personally that the Big 12 needed BYU to win this game to secure, at least have a high percentage of their conference having that essential bye week, so that when you really have to think about it in terms of how your conference is perceived versus other ones, you want to have that extra bye week to show that you have like some kind of dominance, some kind of say in, again, the conversation for future changes to the playoff format. You know, I've been seeing brackets that people have been putting in hypothetical situations of 18 teams, 16 teams, 22, 24 teams, which is kind of insane. I hope college football never gets to that point. Like, I think 12 is a sweet spot and we should not expand more than that, but most likely we will. Regardless, I would think the Big 12 would want to have as many teams in that bye position, so that when that conversation happens, like, okay, how is the Big 12 versus the SEC and Big 10? It's like, well, we've had this many bye teams, and BYU not being in that spot now, and Texas Tech is now in. It kind of just throws a little pickle in there, to be quite honest with you. But regardless, Texas Tech gets the job done. Their defense holding BYU to just 7 points, I think, is impressive alone. I know a lot of people don't have a lot of nice things to say about the Provo Cougs. We do here at your Sports Outpost, as I'm trying to burp. I mean, because we have had them in our top 25 this whole season, they've been proving why you should have had BYU in your top 25 in general. They're a legit team still. I think they can give trouble to, your mid-level teams in the Big Ten and the SEC, and could possibly win those games. Obviously, it has to be played on the field to prove that. But regardless, I think the Big 12 is now kind of put in a little bit of a predicament that they won't have that for sure bye. But we'll have to wait and see. I think Texas Tech could be one of those top 4 teams. It just has to have all of the nice dominoes to fall down to allow that to happen. Georgia plays Texas this upcoming weekend. Alabama plays Oklahoma. If the Sooners and the Longhorns win those games, they can very well get into one of those top 4 spots. It's just like you have to just wait and hope that other teams lose, which is kind of unfortunate there for Texas Tech. We keep moving now to Georgia versus Mississippi State, as I'm ranting and raving through a lot of these games. So we have to do that because how deep into the season we are now in. But 41-21 is the result between Georgia and Mississippi State. They're in Starkville. Very impressive win. Have to say that, because the Dogs out of Starkville have been riding this fine line of pitting pretty good teams to their limits. Texas, not too long ago, they beat Arizona State earlier this season, who beat Texas Tech, but Texas Tech was in a backup quarterback scenario. Regardless, Mississippi State has actually been kind of the similar kind of case as Auburn has been in, because it's the Southeastern Conference. These schedules in conference are very hard to win a lot of games, and I still have to give Jeff Lebby a lot of credit. I really didn't think they were going to win this many games into the season. And this game, everyone thought it was going to be a game where Georgia was going to make it close because making mistakes, not being able to handle the speed that this Mississippi State offense offers. But they handled it quite well, 41-21. I'm quite happy to see this. Essentially a blowout there in Starkville, I would say. And another win that Kirby Smart gets to add to his column. He has a incredible test this upcoming weekend against Texas, who just had a bye. So there's enough time to prepare to finally get one over Kirby Smart and his Dogs for Steve Sarkisian and his Longhorns. We keep moving to another top 25 matchup. That is Oregon heading over to Iowa City to take on the Hawkeyes. 18-16. This game came down to a rainy field goal attempt where the Ducks got it through the uprights. I think it actually ended with a fumble on kickoff because there was enough time to allow that. The Hawkeyes played a great game. Kurt Herbstreit was talking about this matchup in the game day pick'ems, and mentioned that Iowa State would be in a position to win this game. Very much a similar scoreline that he predicted, which is kind of funny. That again, the Hawkeyes would win by a field goal, but it ended up being the Oregon doing that. And this kind of game was very similar to the Ducks last year against Wisconsin there in Madison. And they get the job done. That's all that kind of matters. I understand a lot of people have not given Oregon enough credit. I here at your Sports Outpost have, because we know how legit Dane Lanning and his program is. They went into this game without their leading receiver, De'Corian Moore, who's a true freshman. He was out, and that was announced like literally moments before kickoff, it felt like. And then on top of that, they played old school Big Ten football and got the job done. And then again, that is the only thing that matters, is that you get a win in that column. they have a interesting stretch of games. I think USC, they're at home, which I think they play Minnesota this upcoming weekend. And then next week after, they'll play USC at home, and then they will have Washington. I think they're in Seattle, if I'm not mistaken. Regardless, Oregon has a decent in terms of games where they can get got there. I was actually talking about this with one of the co-hosts over at DGen Takes, Noah, the Money Chain Choo Choo. Go over there and watch their show. They're basically the ESPN of Rumble. But yeah, talking about that, like how they have the possibility, if they drop a game, could be out of the college football playoff, which is like not a good thing. Like, you need to have Oregon, regardless of Indiana, Ohio State's result. You have to have Oregon in there. They're kind of the only team there in the Big Ten that can really compete with anyone outside the conference, to be quite honest with you. So Oregon dropping a game would not be good for the conference and help the chances of them three-peating as having a third national championship in a row go to the Big Ten. But again, they do what they need to do. They go on the road once again. They're deeper into original Big Ten country. They did this not too long ago against, I'm forgetting who they played before the Penn State game, or after the Penn State game, actually, to be quite honest with you. I know they played Northwestern there in Illinois. I'm trying to think of the other game. It might have been Maryland. I don't think, actually, no, when I think about it, I don't think they played Maryland. Oh, it was Rutgers. They went over to New Jersey. So they have been traveling pretty well for Oregon when they had to play these conference games on the East Coast or in the Midwest. We now have a close game between Alabama and LSU. I didn't think this one would end up being that way, especially seeing Garrett Nussmeier be benched in this contest. 20-9 is the end result. And Alabama keeps rolling here in 2025. Not surprised that they beat the Tigers out of Baton Rouge, who have been pretty awful this season. That's why we saw them fire their head coach, Brian Kelly. But you saw them at least attempt some kind of running game or trying to establish that. They still lost at the end of the day, but you got to give them effort, especially with this coaching staff that probably shouldn't be dealing with the players that they have been dealt. LSU should be playing at a very much higher level, but I think since Brian Kelly has come in, the lack of good recruitment is going to put LSU into a hole I don't know if they can get themselves out of, because of how good the SEC is now these days and how of an equal playing field the conference has been as of late. Regardless, Alabama gets the job done. 20-9. They're at home. They basically were going to win this game. Going to be kind of interesting to see, though, their opponents who put out a backup quarterback and how that all cracks down on the next couple of weeks of who's actually going to be taking snaps there for the Bayou Bengals. Third to last game, and another one in the top 25 where we got right 38-17 between Texas A&M versus Missouri. So much bad news coming out of Columbia for the Tigers. You have your starting quarterback get hurt a couple weeks ago against Vanderbilt. You're having to start a true freshman quarterback. Your kicker in the first game of the season has a leg injury where he's done for the year. Just a lot of bad news. And unfortunately, they suffer and lose 38-17. Marcel Reed, if he's not one of the finalists for the Heisman and other awards later this year, I'm going to be very surprised. He has been playing so well. I was talking a lot of trash about him this past offseason. I'll see it when I believe it. And boy, do I believe Marcel Reed is a legit player, not here at the collegiate level, but I think in the NFL, he could be a first-round draft pick. Hopefully he doesn't come out into the league this season. I hope he literally stays until the very end so that he can develop, turn into a legit player that would increase his stock. Like he's been able to hit deep balls that I didn't think he was capable of, and he did it not only in this game but has been doing it all 2025. Marcel Reed, if you have a Texas A&M game to watch, that one there in Austin against the Longhorns is one you're going to have to want to tune in for later this season, because that game is going to be an absolute riot, and I cannot wait for it. Next up, the second to last game, 34-10. Ohio State beats Purdue there in Lafayette, or West Lafayette, if I'm not mistaken, or whatever the Lafayette it is. Boilermakers made it a game there in the first half, but the Buckeyes pull away as they usually do, 34-10. Don't have to do anything special against Purdue. To be quite honest with you, you don't really see a lot of blowouts between like the best in the Big Ten versus the worst. Just kind of the way it is that we have seen the last couple of seasons. So the scoreline is not like anything to be like, oh man, like Ohio State didn't score 40 or 50 points against the Boilermakers. It is what it is. But 34-10 is the result there. And Ryan Brown for Purdue is actually back at quarterback. The final game to talk about, 27-24. Indiana wins for the first time there in Happy Valley against Penn State. The previous two wins against the Indy Lions were at home. They finally get the job done where they had to make it a road trip. So this game, kind of just history in the making when you kind of think of it about it. But unfortunately, it is a close result. This game was in the double digits in terms of lines being set between the two. Regardless, Indiana keeps rolling. They get the job done, and also they get the hump over as they get their first win over Penn State there on the road. As that is it for our top 25 games to talk about. Here is the big graphic of what we got right and what we got wrong. Only 3. I'll take it. As again, that is the top 25 that we win.